In a remote corner of the American West, a newborn foal was left behind in a lonely valley, no mother, no herd, and no way out. When the wolves found him, no one believed he would survive. But at the exact moment when life teetered toward death, a creature emerged from the edge of the wild. No one knew who he was. All they knew was, from that moment on, a legend was born. Evening winds swirled across Winchester Ridge, where barren hills sliced the sky like waves of earth, carved by time and wind. The sun was slowly sinking behind the Absaroka Mountains, casting fiery shades of orange and red across layers of dry soil and withered roots. In this farthest corner of the wild, hidden beneath switchgrass that rose to a man's knee, lay a tiny life. A newborn Mustang foal, barely 3 days old. His name was Scout. Scout had never known what loneliness felt like until today. His mother, a chestnut mare named Juniper, had left early to search for water in streams that only surfaced after rare rainfalls. She had tucked him away in the tall grass, thinking it was safe. But in the wild, safe was never certain. Scout didn't understand why she had been gone for so long. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the valley. Alone in the rising dusk and wind, Scout began to tremble. The breeze pierced through his thin coat, making his frail body shudder. His legs were still wobbly, his steps unsteady. All he could do was lower his head and wait. Wait for his mother, or some kind of miracle. But what came first was death. A soft rustle like the whisper of dry leaves. Then a shadow slid along the edge of the forest. Scout jerked his head up, his little heart pounding. And then eyes, dozens of them, golden, glowing in the fading light like haunting lanterns. Wolves. The Gray Creek Pack notorious hunters of this region had caught Scout's scent from miles away. They were hungry. And Scout? He was the easiest target. No herd, no mother, no defense. He lay in the valley like a lamb for the slaughter. The alpha rook, a grizzled gray wolf with a torn ear and a jaw twisted from an old fight, stepped forward. He wasn't in a rush. The cries, the bites, the final gasps, he'd heard them hundreds of times. He was never late. Scout struggled to his feet, his spindly legs quivering like twigs in the wind. He took a step back, then slipped. Wide eyes welled with tears. He had no plan, no voice, no escape. This was the end. Until the ground began to shake. A new sound, heavier, deeper, rumbled through the dirt. Not a wolf, not a bear. Hoofbeats. The pack froze. Rook turned his head. Atop the western hill, where the sun left only a thin streak of light, a shadow stood. Massive, muscled, his mane whipped like ocean spray. His eyes burned like coals in a storm. A jet-black stallion. Alone, tall and still, framed by the evening glow. No one knew where he came from. He had no herd, no companions, just one body stepping from the darkness. His name was Ashfire. He didn't neigh. He didn't call out. He just stared, and that look alone made the wolves hesitate. And then Ashfire charged. Wind screamed behind him. Stones burst beneath every pounding hoof. Scout's eyes widened. The stallion was charging straight at him, right into the heart of the wolf circle. Rook hissed a signal. 2 wolves lunged. Ashfire didn't stop. He roared not in words, but in something ancient. If horses could speak, it would have meant, "This is my land." His hooves came down like sledgehammers on the first wolf's skull. The crack echoed. The second wolf jumped back, blood dripping from its shoulder. Rook growled, ready to strike, but Ashfire spun, putting his massive frame between Scout and the threat. The wolves understood. This battle was lost. One by one, they retreated, swift as they came. Even Rook backed off, his gaze locked on Ashfire. He knew this horse was not ordinary. Next time, he would not come alone. When the last shadow vanished into the woods, Ashfire turned. His breathing was heavy. Dust and blood clung to his chest. He looked down at Scout still curled beneath the grass. Two eyes met one survivor, one warrior. Ashfire said nothing. And he didn't leave. He just stood there, guarding. In that moment, Scout didn't know what wild horses were. He didn't know the laws of the land or honor. But he understood one thing: the one who saved him wasn't his mother, wasn't kin. He was that stranger, the black flame from the nameless edge. And thus began the Winchester night, with the wind howling, owls crying, and two souls, one old, one young, standing side by side in the wild. Dawn crept over Winchester Ridge like a fragile whisper of survival. Mist still hovered close to the ground, casting everything in a pale gray dampness. In the grassy valley below, Scout lay still, curled within a blanket of wild grass, his tired eyes gazing toward the hilltop where Ashfire had stood the night before, like a statue carved from twilight. He had survived. Though his legs still trembled and his heart raced at every rustle in the brush, Scout knew one thing with certainty: someone had stood between him and death last night. It wasn't his mother, it wasn't his herd, it was a lone stallion, shaped like a shadow and galloping like thunder. When Scout opened his eyes again, Ashfire was gone. Panic struck like lightning. He jumped to his shaky legs, eyes darting across the meadow, heart pounding wildly in his little chest. No, it couldn't be. Don't leave me. Mama. A weak whinny escaped his throat. No one answered. For the second time in his life, Scout found himself abandoned in the wild, and this time the fear was worse. Not because of the wolves, but because the shadow that had saved him was no longer there. He stumbled forward, staggering a few steps, ears twitching back, searching for any familiar sound. And then, a sharp, short breath behind him. Scout turned. Just 5 steps away, Ashfire stood silently, hoofprints pressed into a patch of flattened grass, early sunlight glinting off his black coat, making him shimmer like burning steel. He stared at Scout not with warmth, not with disdain. Just calm, as if he'd been there all along. As if he was waiting to see if the foal had the courage to follow. Ashfire turned, said nothing, no neigh, no call. He just walked. One step, then another, then disappearing into the northern brush where the trees grew taller and the hills sharper. Scout froze. He understood. This was a test, no invitation, no more protection. He would have to choose, stay and wait for a mother who might never return, or follow the stranger into woods no one had named. He looked back toward the spot where he'd laid last night, where his mother had left him. No sounds, no fresh hoof prints, no one looking for him. He lifted his head, eyes wide in the morning light. And then he stepped forward. His legs still shook, his heart still pounded, but he followed toward Ashfire, who never once looked back. Morning in Winchester was not gentle. The wind cut like blades, the grass prickled like needles. The ground sloped and bristled with stones and thorns. Scout tried to trace Ashfire's hoofprints to keep from slipping. It wasn't easy. Ashfire walked like the land was his. No hesitation, no misstep. Each stomp of his hoof was firm, deliberate. He didn't wait. He didn't slow down. Scout gasped for air. His stomach churned with hunger. His legs caked in mud. But he didn't cry out, didn't stop, because every time he looked up, Ashfire was still moving, like a boulder rolling downhill unstoppable. By noon they reached a natural ledge that jutted out like a balcony above a narrow valley, where a small creek wove like silver thread through the trees below. Ashfire stopped. Scout stopped too, panting hard. He was just about to lie down when Ashfire suddenly turned around. For the first time, those deep red-black eyes stared directly at him. No anger, no exhaustion, just a warning. Then Ashfire lifted his right front hoof and struck it 3 times against a flat rock nearby. Scout blinked, confused, and then he understood. Ashfire was teaching him how to signal danger, how to test stone before stepping. No words, no sound. Ashfire turned away again and kept going. Scout stood frozen. Something stirred inside his chest. This wasn't just a rescuer. Ashfire was teaching him. The afternoon dragged slowly. They climbed a low ridge, descended into mossy valleys wet with mist, then climbed again onto hard, sun-baked red rock that cracked beneath their weight. At one sharp bend, Scout slipped falling into a shallow ditch, his knees scraping. He let out a small cry. Ashfire turned. He stared for a long moment. Then he walked closer, slowly. He lowered his head and gently nudged Scout upright with his forehead. That was all. Then he walked away. Night 2. Scout curled into a patch of short grass near Ashfire's legs. The stars blazed above, but inside Scout felt uneasy. Strange noises. Owl calls, the cry of some unseen creature. A small whimper escaped him, accidental, like a hidden sob. Ashfire stirred. He didn't turn, but Scout saw him shift, moving closer. His large frame blocked the wind. His breathing made the grass shiver softly. And Scout drifted off to sleep for the first time in his life, under the breath of a stranger whom his heart was beginning to trust. From deep within the woods, 2 golden eyes watched them in the night. Rook had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. When the sun rose above the thinning pine canopy of Winchester Forest, Scout could sense a shift in the air. The wind no longer carried the dry taste of dust or the raw scent of wild grass. It was colder here, heavier, like a quiet warning whispered by the woods to those who dared enter. Ashfire led the way, still silent, still steady. His stride was carved from stone, resolute, unwavering. When Scout stumbled, Ashfire only glanced briefly, then kept going. He didn't wait, but he never abandoned him. They crossed a dry stream bed where limestone had been worn smooth as mirrors by time. Scout bent down to drink. A sharp hiss sliced through the air near his ear. He jerked his head up, every hair on his coat standing. In a low bush, a copperhead rattlesnake had coiled tightly, tongue flicking, eyes locked like 2 live bullets. Scout backed away instinctively, but the snake was already primed to strike. Ashfire moved first. He lunged forward like a mini-storm, front hooves crashing down into the brush. Crack! Like brittle wood snapping in a fire, the snake flew aside, lifeless. Scout froze in place. Ashfire turned, casting him a glance that for a moment seemed to say, "Stay sharp." Winchester Forest wasn't a thick jungle, but it held a strange kind of gloom, one that even predators approached with caution. Every sound, a snapping twig, a wind-shifted branch made Scout's nerves twitch. In one denser patch of woods, they came across a black bear mother and cub. The mother was flipping rocks for insects. The cub tumbled in the ferns nearby. As Scout stepped forward, the bear mother looked up and growled softly. Ashfire immediately dropped his head, tightened his stance, and began backing away, slow and controlled. Scout mimicked him. It took them nearly 10 minutes to curve safely out of sight. When they reached a patch of mossy clearing, both stopped to rest. Scout collapsed onto the cool ground, breathing hard. For the first time, he no longer feared Ashfire. He whispered softly, "Are we just going to keep walking like this forever?" Of course, Ashfire didn't respond. But this time, instead of walking away like usual, the stallion lay down, just a few paces away, not close, but close enough for Scout to know he was allowed to stay. Night 3. The deep forest was strangely silent. No owls, no rustling. Even the wind had calmed, as if something heavier was suppressing it. Scout couldn't sleep. Moonlight pierced through the branches, casting white stripes across Ashfire's back. He turned to study him. Long scars ran along his flanks, winding like brittle tree roots, some still raw, others raised and old. Scout whispered, "Did they catch you once?" Ashfire didn't move, but one ear twitched. Scout tucked himself against the trunk of a pine, the smell of resin and cold dirt filling his nose. The breeze carried something unfamiliar. Blood, wet fur, and wolves. He bolted upright. Ashfire was already standing blocking the foal, his head low, nostrils flaring. A twig snapped at the edge of the woods, then quick, panting breaths. Like something had just finished running, Ashfire began to retreat, step by step. Scout ducked behind a bush, eyes wide, heart pounding. From the shadows across the clearing, 2 golden eyes emerged, then 4. This wasn't a test. The Gray Creek pack was back. And this time, they weren't alone. There were more of them now, silent, coordinated, stronger. The next morning, as sunlight crested the distant mountain ridge, Scout saw Ashfire grazing near a stream's edge, acting like nothing had happened. But Scout knew Ashfire hadn't slept all night, and the wolves hadn't given up. Their journey pressed into steeper terrain. Loose rocks and broken shale made every step treacherous. Scout slipped many times. One fall scraped his hind leg until it bled. Ashfire stopped, lowered his head to sniff the wound. He didn't lick it, didn't speak. But he stood there until Scout could stand again. At a high overlook, Ashfire came to an abrupt halt. He raised his head. Scout followed his gaze and saw it, a small field below, crisscrossed with hoofprints. Horses, not just Ashfire, not just Scout. There was a herd nearby. Scout wanted to whinny, but Ashfire bit lightly at his shoulder. Not hard, just enough to stop him. His ears twitched forward. Then, for the first time, Scout heard a sound he'd never heard from Ashfire. A low, gruff whinny, more like a growl than a call. A signal. A warning. And then they moved again, heading toward whatever fate lay ahead, but neither of them knew. In the thickets nearby, Rook was still watching. And this time, he wasn't alone. Night fell over Winchester Ridge like a silver veil draped across the land. A full moon hung suspended in the sky, so bright it lit every trembling blade of grass. Scout curled beneath a broken pine stump, his entire body aching, but his eyes stayed wide open. He couldn't sleep. Not after what he'd sensed in the woods last night. Not after the silent vigilance in Ashfire's stare. And not with that strange, burning tension coiling in his chest, something young foals rarely get wrong. Ashfire stood ahead of him, tall and immovable, like a pillar of midnight beneath the white moon. His head tilted slightly, ears flicking with every rustle in the forest. It was too quiet. So quiet. Scout couldn't even hear insects. A sudden gust blew across the dry grass, making it ripple like waves. And then a branch snapped. Scout jumped. Ashfire turned. Both stared in the same direction. From behind a low line of pines, 9 wolf shadows stepped into the moonlight. No more hiding. No more waiting. This time the Gray Creek pack came like an army. Scout instinctively backed up. His heart slammed against his ribs so hard it felt like his throat had closed. Rook, the scar-faced alpha, moved first. His body low, almost dragging the ground like a coiled spring. To his left, 2 young wolves with burning eyes. To his right, a one-eyed female with a back lined in old wounds. They weren't here to threaten. They were here to end it. Ashfire let out a deep, broken whinny, not loud, but sharp and urgent. A warning. Scout understood it instantly. Run! but he couldn't. His legs rooted to the earth. In front of him, death. Behind him, a low ravine. Ashfire was the only thing between him and the void. A wolf charged first, but didn't make it far. Ashfire spun, slamming his front hooves into the attacker's skull, flipping it backward in a blur of fur and yelping pain. The second wolf was smarter, lunging from the flank. Scout cried out. Ashfire twisted midair, back legs launching a brutal kick. Crack! Bone shattered like kindling. But then another wolf, low to the ground, glided like a shadow toward Scout. Scout backed away, but his leg tangled in a root. He fell. The wolf's mouth opened, tongue out, fangs gleaming in the moonlight. Scout screamed, and then a brown blur tore through the clearing like a storm. Juniper. She flew from the trees as if hurled by the earth itself, eyes ablaze, hooves slashing down on the wolf's face, sending it skidding yards across the dirt. "Scout!" she cried, her voice a thunderous neigh. Scout gasped, then crawled toward her, burying his face in her neck. Her scent familiar, warm, and wild made the terror melt. But it wasn't over. From behind Juniper, hoofbeats thundered, not one, not two, an entire herd of wild mustangs, battle-scarred, muscle-bound, their manes whipping like fire and eyes glowing with firelight. They arrived with deafening cries, pounding hooves, and an energy that shook the earth. Ashfire reared, unleashing a battle cry that echoed across the valley, a call to arms. The herd surged forward, not just for Scout, not just for Ashfire, for life itself. The wolves reeled, formation shattered. Rook barked orders, but too late. Juniper shielded Scout with her entire body. Ashfire charged ahead, hooves slamming into a fleeing wolf's side. The herd fanned out in a crescent, pushing the wolves toward the ravine's edge. Then a young stallion screamed and charged straight at Rook. The alpha fought back, but was knocked away. The Gray Creek pack began to retreat, pair by pair, into the woods, as if chased by phantoms. Only Rook remained, snarling in the open. He lunged. Ashfire stepped forward, head raised high. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. He simply stood there like a monument declaring without words, "This is not your land anymore." Rook backed down, then vanished into the dark. The battle ended in silence. Scout clung to Juniper, heart still racing. He looked up at Ashfire, still standing, massive under the moon, eyes fixed on the tree line, as if unsure it was truly over. Juniper turned toward him. Her eyes were no longer hostile but cautious. She said nothing, just stood between her foal and Ashfire. But Scout knew something had changed. He was no longer just a lost colt. He had seen blood. He had smelled death. He had tasted life and courage, and Ashfire was no longer a stranger. He was a part of fate. From within the trees, a low whinny sounded. A horse stepped out. Chief Dustmane, leader of Juniper's herd. He looked at Ashfire. Said nothing. But in his eyes, a seed was planted. A storm far greater than any Scout had seen was coming. Morning wind swept across the golden grasslands of Winchester Ridge, carrying with it the hushed breath of a dawn no longer peaceful. Dew still clung to the blades, reflecting the early light like powdered stardust scattered from the sky. Scout walked beside his mother, Juniper, each step still echoing the battle of the night before. He was no longer the frightened foal from 3 days ago. He had seen blood. He had stood on the brink of death. And now he knew. Everything he had, life, mother, herd, had stood behind Ashfire's hooves. Ashfire kept his distance. He didn't look at Juniper. He didn't look at Scout. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, as if he didn't belong here, because, truth be told, he didn't. In this Mustang herd, Ashfire was an outsider. From the far edge of the valley, Juniper's old herd began to gather in a crescent formation. At the center stood a massive stallion with a dark chestnut coat and 3 thick scars crisscrossing his chest like blades of time etched into flesh. Chief Dustmane, longtime leader, father to many, and not one to be challenged lightly. As Ashfire, Scout, and Juniper stepped into the clearing, the entire herd lifted their heads in unison. No whinnies, no stomping hooves, just silence heavy as mountain stone. Dustmane stepped forward, his cold eyes locked onto Ashfire. No thanks for the battle, no gesture of respect. Just a question like thunder hitting rock. "Who are you?" Ashfire didn't answer. "You don't belong to this herd. You weren't invited. So why are you still here?" Still no reply. Dustmane stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Leave when the sun crests the eastern ridge. This land is mine." Juniper moved between them, planting herself firmly between the 2 stallions. "He saved my son. He saved me. He saved this herd." Dustmane glanced at her, then back at Ashfire. The law doesn't change for sentiment. One who does not belong to the herd does not stay. Ashfire remained silent, but in his dark, stormy eyes he did not back down. As afternoon descended, tension wrapped the air like wire. The herd spread out along the hillside, grazing in silence, ears constantly alert. Scout stood near Ashfire. Even when Juniper called him, he didn't move far. "You're not going to leave, are you?" Scout whispered, his big eyes gazing up at the stallion's towering silhouette. Ashfire didn't speak, but he lowered his head slightly, exhaling a warm gust through his nose. A single breath blew the grass beneath Scout's hooves. Scout knew. That was his answer. When the sun dropped below the western ridge, Dustmane stepped into the open field. His eyes blazed in the fading light like coals refusing to die. "No one challenges me without falling," he said. "If you want to stay, prove you're worthy." Ashfire stepped forward without being asked. Juniper let out a soft, anxious whinny, but nothing could stop what was coming. A circle formed, grass trampled under hooves. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. 2 stallions, one of tradition, one of wilderness, faced each other like ancient stones pulled from the heart of the earth. A single whinny rang out, and the battle began. Dustmane charged first, like a spear of living wood, ramming into Ashfire's shoulder hard enough to raise a dust storm. Ashfire staggered back, twisting mid-step to dodge a crushing hoofswipe. He countered with a powerful rear kick slamming into Dustmane's ribcage. The old chief stumbled, but Dustmane was no novice. He pivoted, jaws wide, clamping down on Ashfire's neck. A shriek tore through the air. Blood spilled. The herd backed away. No one dared intervene. Scout looked to his mother. Juniper was breathing hard, her eyes locked on the clash. She whispered to no one, "Please, don't die." The duel lasted longer than anyone expected. Ashfire was fast, a storm wrapped in muscle. Dustmane was old but stubborn, brutal and unyielding. Every blow was a declaration. Every wound a chapter written in skin. At the 11th clash, Dustmane lost his footing, his back hoof slipping on gravel. Ashfire didn't hesitate. He launched upward, smashing his entire body into Dustmane's chest, sending the old stallion tumbling nearly 10 feet. Dustmane rolled once, then lay still. Silence. No whinnies. Only Ashfire's heavy breath. And stunned eyes from every horse present. Dustmane lifted his head, slowly, painfully. Blood trickled from a long bite along his neck. He stared at Ashfire for a long time. Then he bowed his head to the earth. Not from fear, from law. The stronger leads. That night, Ashfire didn't eat. He stood atop a high outcrop, gazing down at the valley. Scout limped toward him, still sore from his fall earlier. "You didn't have to fight," he said softly. "I believe in you." Ashfire didn't reply, but for the first time he lowered his head and gently touched his forehead to Scout's. He didn't need words. That gesture said it all. In the dark of Winchester night, something had changed. The outsider had become a leader, and what lay ahead would be far from peace. At dawn on Winchester Ridge, clouds gathered low along the horizon. The air felt strange-like. The earth itself was holding its breath. Forest birds had gone quiet. Even the wind had stilled. Subtle signals ones the Mustang sensed better than any creature alive. Ashfire stood on the highest ledge of the northern ridge. Below him, the newly unified herd grazed and rested free, strong yet freshly shaken by the shift in leadership. Juniper stood near the base of the slope, her eyes never leaving Ashfire's silhouette. Scout stood beside her, but his heart was tethered to the dark figure above. A quiet unease coiled inside the young foal. Things felt peaceful, but Scout knew better. This kind of peace always came before a storm. From far off, the wind began to change. Smoke, but not from wildfire, not from lightning. This smoke carried the bitter scent of oil, burned rubber, and metal. Ashfire was the first to smell it. Then Juniper. Then the rest of the herd, one by one, heads lifted, ears locked forward like living antennae. Scout didn't understand until a new sound tore through the still air. Engines! He raised his head. On the eastern hill, shadows began to emerge, humans, not cowboys, not ranchers on Mustangs. These were different. Men in leather, steel gloves, riding domesticated horses, or small off-road vehicles dragging coils of rope, leg traps, and iron cages. Mustang hunters. Out here, many ranchers still saw wild horses as pests eating pasture, breaking fences, bringing media and animal rights folks from the cities. To them, a wild horse wasn't a symbol. It was a target. "Run!" Juniper cried, her whinny sharp as thunder. The herd exploded into motion, a single synchronized mass. Scout froze until a rope whistled past his ear. "Whip!" he screamed and bolted toward his mother. The man who threw the rope Tucker Rayner gritted his teeth. "There's a foal! Get the black one in the back!" Two other hunters raised their lassos. Ashfire was on the flank, watching for threats. When he turned to check the herd, a rope coiled around Scout's neck. Scout collapsed. His legs flailed helplessly in the dust. The rope tightened. Juniper screamed, turning back too late. Tucker leapt from his horse, advancing on the foal dragging in the dirt. And then Ashfire arrived like a thunderclap. No one saw where he came from. Only the sound, a battle cry from hell itself. He charged Tucker head-on, hooves smashing down beside the man's face, sending dust and pebbles flying like shrapnel. Tucker stumbled backward, raising the rope again, but hesitated. Ashfire bit down on the rope, yanked hard. Snap! The cord broke. Scout rolled free, gasping for air. Juniper rushed in, circling her son, nudging him upright with frantic force. But the hunters weren't done. From the western slope, two more men closed in, armed with tranquilizer guns. Ashfire turned to face them. The first shot missed. The second hit, sinking into his left shoulder. He staggered. His legs trembled. "No!" Scout cried out. Ashfire shook his head violently, like purging poison from his blood. He backed up 2 steps, then charged forward as if untouched. He rammed one hunter's horse, knocking it off balance. The man tumbled down, his gun lost in the grass. Curses filled the air. The hunters scattered. Juniper led the herd toward the dense woods. No vehicle could follow them there. Scout clung to her side. Every stumble, he was nudged forward. There was no time for pain. Ashfire ran in the rear, guarding every open path. When they reached a narrow mountain pass, the herd collapsed from exhaustion. Scout fell first breathless, foam lining his lips. Ashfire arrived last. His left shoulder bled, but he stood. Juniper stepped forward, lowering her head, and touched her forehead to his neck. For the first time, Ashfire did not pull away. Night fell fast over the northern slopes. From the ridgeline, Scout looked back toward the valley they had fled. He saw flashlights, campfires. He heard the whine of radios echo through the darkness. "They haven't left," Juniper murmured. Ashfire said nothing. He only stared. His pitch-black eyes didn't burn like a storm anymore. They held something deeper, something that had been chained, caged, and had escaped. Scout asked softly, "They caught you once, didn't they?" Ashfire turned his head slowly. Under the moonlight, a long scar on his neck caught the light. Scout didn't need an answer. He knew the price of freedom. The herd lay still that night. No whinnies, no dreams. But from the direction of the human camp, the scent of gasoline, of iron, and of something sinister still drifted across the trees. Ashfire knew. The real battle would come with the sunrise. The sun had yet to rise, but all of Winchester Ridge was bathed in a faint silver glow from the dying moon. The night's heavy shroud was peeling away like smoke, revealing jagged hills and sunburnt grass. Early winds whistled through the crags, carrying the burnt scent of dying campfires far below. At the peak, on a spear-shaped ledge of stone Ashfire, stood still, silent as a monument. Dried blood clung to his left shoulder. Fresh hoof prints stained the mud beneath him, evidence of human trespass. Below, in a hollow carved by nature, the Mustang herd lay scattered in shallow rest. Some mares still heaved with exhaustion. A few young stallions kept watch, wide-eyed in the sleepless dark. Juniper stood beside her son. Her gaze rose toward Ashfire, the stallion who had become their leader, but still remained separate, like a shard of the night yet to fade. Scout was no longer the naive colt he once was. His baby coat had thickened. His wide eyes now held something deeper awareness, strength, clarity. He looked up at Ashfire with unspoken trust, a reverence that transcended blood. From the east, as the first streaks of light tore through the shadows, the sound came. Hoofbeats, metal, men. "They're moving," a mare whispered. "They're circling from the west." Ashfire didn't neigh. He turned his head, scanning the herd. Then his eyes met Juniper's. She nodded, just once, but it was enough. The herd understood. It was time. Ashfire's plan wasn't built on brute strength. It was built on knowledge of the land, the wind, and human fear. He divided the herd into 3 units. A small decoy group to draw the enemy, a central force waiting to strike back, and a rear flank where he would stand with the bravest stallions to unleash chaos. Scout begged to join him. Juniper tried to stop him, but Ashfire leaned in, touching his muzzle to Scout's forehead gentle as wind. "If you're afraid, stay behind," Juniper whispered. "I'm not afraid anymore," Scout replied softly, "because I'm not alone." Ashfire gave the smallest nod. And then he led them down the rock face like a wild river crashing through stone. The hunters were not prepared. Instead of running, the Mustangs attacked. Whinnies ripped through the air. Hooves struck the ground like thunder. Lassos flew and were shattered by kicks. One hunter's horse was bucked sideways, rolling into a gully. Ashfire charged first. A rope flew toward him. He twisted midair, dodging clean, then spun and kicked the wheel of an ATV climbing the ridge. Crack! The vehicle flipped. The man flew. Screams echoed. Scout saw it all. He chased behind Ashfire. When one hunter raised a net toward Juniper, Scout lunged in, knocking her clear. The net hit a cactus patch instead. Juniper turned to look at her son. And for the first time, she no longer saw him as a colt. The fight didn't last long. The humans fell apart, too slow, too scattered, too unsure. Ashfire did not pursue. He stood in the center of the valley, lifted his head, and let out a final war cry, a thunderous whinny that rolled like an avalanche. The herd gathered around him, and the sky slowly brightened. On the cliff where Scout once lay shivering his first night, he now stood tall beside his mother, and the stallion he now called his father. Below, the valley stretched wide and wounded. Above, the wind howled through the peaks, and behind him was every lesson he'd bled to learn. As the full sun broke over the eastern ridges, the Mustangs began their journey westward toward hills untouched by man. Ashfire led the way, his black coat shimmering in the golden light. Juniper followed close. Scout ran behind them, not tired, not afraid. At the forest's edge he paused. Turning back, he looked at Winchester Ridge one last time, the place where he had been born, where he had nearly died, where he had been saved, trained, loved, and given something more precious than life itself, an identity, no longer a lost foal, no longer an abandoned child. Scout was now a legend in the making. They say that even years later, at the break of dawn, you can still spot a black stallion on the edge of Winchester Bluff. He never stays long. He never steps down, like a fire keeping watch over the last frontier of freedom. His name is Ashfire, and his story and Scout's will never be forgotten. If you believe that even the smallest life deserves protection, drop a 1 in the comments below. If you've ever seen yourself in Scout alone, afraid, but rising strong, leave a 0. Stories like this continue every week. Subscribe to True Animal Stories and hit the bell icon so you never miss another journey where even the smallest soul can become legendary. We tell these stories so you'll never stop believing in miracles.